Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Intersect. My name is Matt Skolnick, and I'm your host. I have the pleasure of being at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, Ukraine, and I have the honor of being with Father Yuriy, who is a professor and a priest, and he just spent a good amount of time walking me around campus, showing me a little bit about who they are, what they believe, how they act, told me a little bit about their history. And so I'm going to ask Father Yuriy just to start out real fast to talk about the history of the school, when it started, when it stopped, how we got restarted again.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Welcome to Ukraine. Welcome to Lviv and Ukrainian Catholic University. And this university, we can go from now into the history or backwards. The modern university, the one where we are now, it has restarted in 2002. Restarted after the School of Theology, which was called the Theological Academy of Lviv, was again restarted in 1991, I think. Before that, for 40 years or more than 40 years, our church and our institutions of education of our church and our university right now is an institution of education of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. But from 1946, from final, so to say, arrival of the Soviets into this territory and up until the late 80s, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church was persecuted, was forbidden from existence, and whoever wanted to survive had to become and transfer into the Russian Orthodox Church. And none of our bishops took that step, and most of our priests and most of the laity again did not do that, and thus the church was forbidden and persecuted. So before that, the history of the university begins in 1929, when what at that time was called the Lviv seminary, and was preparing Greek Catholic priests, added some additional subjects and made the standards of education much higher, and became the Lviv's Theological Academy. So then it was open and moving again in the opposing direction up until the World War II. It was thriving with a lot of new students, a lot of subjects being taught, and becoming an establishment of formation of our priests, and not only also of laity. Being that at the time this part of Ukraine was under Polish government, and this was practically the only educational institution where Ukrainian language was the main language of study, and where Ukrainian subjects were also studied. Poetry, literature, and history, and so forth. So then there was this 40 years of persecution. So our church was not functioning openly, but was underground, and an institution of education was not able to function underground. But there was an underground seminary that kept educating priests for this underground structure. But in the 90s, especially when Ukraine became free, when our church became free, we became an institution again.
So you had mentioned to me that your university celebrates the two M's. The first was martyrdom, and the second was the marginalized. And so we kind of hinted a little bit towards the martyrdom, but can you say a little bit more about that?
Right. So this is one of the, so to say, slogans, but again, it's a bit of a philosophy of our function. And again, both of these things, martyrs and marginalized, apparently have nothing to do with education, with the university as such. But again, our historical background makes that very, very clear, that the only reason we are allowed right now, and we can openly have a Ukrainian Catholic university, is because people in the in the end of the 30s, 1930s, in the 40s especially, they gave up their lives for their church and for everything that the church stood for, and Catholic education was one of them, of course. And so we are able to function now, not only as theological school, but they preserved for us our history, our identity, our nationalism to some extent. and we are really grateful to the martyrs who made this possible.
And so they were able to do that even though they were imprisoned and even though some were shipped
They
off
were
into...
able to do that by death, by dying. Just the fact of them giving everything they have up into they give their life. So people who came after, they could not appreciate their values. What they left us is the values that they were ready to give their lives for, and that is what inspires us to do it.
So the historical inspiration, and then you mentioned what it was like growing up in the 70s and the 80s, still under Soviet rule. Can you talk about your mindset as a kid and as a teen, and how that would have changed as you got a little bit older?
So in the 40s, when the church went underground, many of the priests who kept themselves from the prison and they had to take just regular jobs and everything, they preserved the church, celebrating in the people's houses, giving, baptizing their children, performing marriages and burying people and everything. So the main functions of the church were preserved even during this time. By the time I came around, so to say, I was born in 75 and grew up, things that I remember go back to the 80s. So at my grandparents' house in the little village from where they lived, we knew that they had the ways of communicating and announcing that the priest would come maybe once a month, maybe, or sometimes sooner, sometimes later, but once in a while he would come during the night and he would celebrate a liturgy in our my grandparents' house. And my grandparents knew who of our neighbors were Catholics and would come to participate at these events. And when there was a baptism coming up or a wedding coming up, so there was an underground network of people who communicated and who made that functioning of the pastoral function of the church possible. We were talking about how it is important for the church to realize that it's not only about the prayers and the cult or
the tradition
and everything. Even though that was the main thing that was preserved in the underground church. When there was nothing was possible, what we really did, the liturgy, communion, sacraments, so the marriage, baptism, that was the main thing that was preserved. But also the underground church was had a very strong feeling that it's a kind of a structure of help and of support, and how important for us is not only to pray together, but to support each other and to maintain the values that we stand for. So in the underground church, you would think that social projects of the church would not be possible to carry on, but they were actually very, very important, because it was a closed group of people who were really supported each other in every way, not only in their liturgy and prayers, but in every way possible.
And so this leads into your second M, which is the marginalized.
Right.
And even while as a church you were marginalized, you did practice that, caring for one another and caring for those in need. Can you share a little bit about how that aspect of caring for the marginalized plays into your church and into the university today?
So in the 90s, when the church came from underground, and you really hit it on the head there, we were the ones who really knew what it was to be marginalized. And in the Soviet regime, in the Soviet times, even the theoretical idea was of creating a perfect society. So, and not only perfect economically or perfect in any other sense, but physically as well. So you could actually, look on the YouTube or whatever, the festivals, the Soviet festivals of the 30s and the 40s, and you have all these sports people, walking around with beautiful muscles and all of that. So that led over time to a mentality where disabled, especially people, were shunned away from society. So during Soviet times, the government would be owner of all the apartments and houses, and they would be giving them sort of to people. So people with disabilities would be placed in the higher floors of apartment buildings
because they couldn't get up and down.
They couldn't get up and down, and they would be absent from the streets mostly. So there was this mentality of people I don't know if it's the proper word, shunning them away, sort of putting them in the back seat. And our church really felt that we have to do something about it, of course, for the sake of the Christian mission, but also for the sake of us realizing that what it is to be, shunned away and marginalized. So especially our university in the 90s and ever since its inception until today, is trying to include people with disabilities and all sorts of marginalized into our structure. And also because it is, they really become teachers of values and of teachers of love. How can you, in an academic environment, explain love to a student? It's very hard. It takes books and classes.
It's an experience.
It's a very big experience, a very difficult one, but it takes one hug from a disabled person sometimes to really communicate thankfulness, gratefulness, and love and kindness. So we implement them in things where they can be implemented due to their situation, but we try to make as much possible contact between the students and marginalized in our university, because they can add so much to the teaching programs through just being with us.
So when we were coming into the building, you shared two stories. Do you mind sharing those again about, I think it was Vlad who had a birthday, and then maybe the gentleman with cerebral palsy?
Because when you said we were entering the building, is the dormitory, is that the right word? Dormitory facility of the university, right? And we dedicated, we set up this apartment for the people with disabilities in our dormitory facility. So there was this boy Vladimir who has a mental disability, and the university, there was an organization at the university that helps people with disabilities to find jobs and to be integrated into society. But he had a birthday last Friday on the 24th of March, and he's very fond of this. So weeks before, he would text me every day announcing that how many days is left until
Father, it's 6 days to my birthday.
6 days,
5
right?
days to my birthday.
And then when on his birthday, I was not in the city, in town, I sent him messages and recorded a little audio messages on WhatsApp or the messaging platforms and everything. And so I saw him today for the first time, and I was able to hug him and to greet him for his birthday, which is extremely important to him. And also we have this other man, Vadik, we call him. Vadim is the full name, but the kind word is Vadik. He lives with his mother here. And he's like 45 or older than that a bit. University created at a specific time. They became just friends of our community, and they became friends of our community partially because he liked to be with young people like himself, but he was not able to, of course, to study because his disability doesn't allow him to. And so the university went to the trouble of creating a special study program in theology. It was centered around theology, but it was specifically registered with the government and got the official approvals and everything. But it was set up in such a way that he can pass the exams and he can go through it. So he visited the classes for several years, and he did all the exams and tests that he could, that he was able to, in order to get a diploma. So he lives with our students, and he does require a lot of volunteers to help him. But even that is, again, we see it not as a burden for us, but a challenge, but an opportunity to teach the students and to learn from this interaction of help, of love. And he's a very good chess player, so he plays chess with the students very often, and they learn from him in that regard too.
Oh, wonderful! I'm glad to hear that. So your university, in the history, you talk about those two M's, the martyrdom and the marginalized, and we've seen a little bit about how that plays out in the life of your university. So for the past 9 years, your country has been under assault. And I'm curious if, when you take that experience that your country's going through, and you also throw world events in there like COVID-19, what are some of the challenges that you see for your students? Or maybe the better way to put that is, how have you seen students change in the past years because of these challenges?
Well, you're correct, very, very much correct that the last, almost a decade, our country specifically is going through a very rough time. Starting with the revolution of dignity, the moment of our revolution. Actually, our government at the time in 2013 and 14, it started in November of 2013 and was going on until February of 2014. We had to overthrow and actually kick out our then president because he tried to, in some extent, sell the country to the Russian Federation, refusing to sign some documents that were being prepared by our government for many years before. And that led to the occupation of some of the territory by Russians. And then a year ago to an escalation, a tragic escalation that led to hundreds of thousands of people murdered and killed between the army and civilians. And I guess on Russian side and on our side as well, it's a horrific thing. The cause of all that, I think, is that the closest, so to say, cause of all that is that when the Soviet Union collapsed, it was really an empire of evil. Like your president, Ronald Reagan,
yes,
it was one of his catchphrases that this is an empire of evil. And when I heard it for the first time in the 80s, and I was a young boy at the time, I was around 15, and I really felt that it's a very precise definition of what was going on. Of course, it's not a political or social definition, but it's really what was going on.
And just to be clear for our listeners, growing up in Ukraine at that time, part of the Soviet Union, part of
right. That's why I was able to sort of comment on that. But never since the collapse of the Soviet Union, that process was actually not completed, not finished. Nobody took responsibility for all the atrocities and evil doings that happened during the Soviet times. So many of the countries that broke away from Soviet Union were able to sort of recreate their life, recreate their countries entirely from scratch. And some others, they started falling back into the mentality of imperialism and occupation, and since we went through 30 years of kind of a development and stabilization of economies and everything, unfortunately in some countries the growth of that mentality became toxic, and this is the result. So we really, as Ukrainians, especially looking back after a year of active war, we sort of realize and understand that what is going on right now is not only a fight between Ukraine and Russia, for some territory we are sort of fighting for the historical truth and justice. That imperialistic mentality has to actually die. It hasn't died yet. It was dismantled in the early 90s with the fall of Soviet Union, but it didn't die.
And that history has been twisted. So from my understanding, Russia came from Kiev and Rus, kind of from a Ukrainian background.
Well, we can all trace our origins back to Kiev.
Okay.
Belarusians, Lithuanians, partially, Russians, Ukrainians. We all came from.
But
Kiev.
the way Putin tells the story, Putin would say that everyone comes from Moscow.
Right.
And that's ahistorical.
What he's saying is that the Moscow is the real. Those who inherited Kiev, so Kiev was destroyed and we moved up, and this is the real Kiev, the second Kiev, or so to say.
And you're saying, hey, but we're still here.
It is definitely not. It is definitely not. And as I say, not only Russians, Belarusians, Lithuanians, and Ukrainians all come from the tradition and the political, religious, educational tradition of Kiev, and also, as Ukrainians, we don't claim to be the only, descendants from.
Sure.
Of course not. It's just like modern Italians would claim the Roman territory or something like that. It's just unthinkable because we realize that history doesn't work that way, that things change. And sometimes when you're stuck in the imperialistic mentality, that what makes I think the basis of our conflict right now. And so this war becomes a fight for freedom, not just a freedom of a couple of hundreds of square kilometers or
Sure.
something. No, it's for freedom as such, it's for dignity as such, it's for values as such. And so thus there is a very big realization, understanding, especially among the young people here, that this is really a war that they have to fight, and there is no way of giving up territory, mentality, or anything. Last year, when the war began, I remember those first days. Unfortunately, because human mind somehow remembers the tragic days very well. You remember every minute. I remember every particular when the first time the siren went off and we realized that we have to run into the basement to hide from possibility of rockets falling on our buildings. Hearing from our friends and family from all over Ukraine that they had to hide and somebody unfortunately died or. So this a year ago, it was a very tragic moment. And I remember this feeling of looking at our students who right away, they jumped into service. They went out into the town. We sort of stopped the classes and the normal processes for maybe about 2 weeks. And in the time, they didn't hang around their dormitories.
They went to help.
They went out. They went to help. And actually, in the first days, what we did, we felt as educators, we felt that we had to sort of pull them back a little bit to preserve their energy, because they, the experience tells you that things don't end up after 2 weeks.
Sure.
You have to preserve your energy.
Yes.
You have to sort of, count your resources and really. But this was on the other side. On the other hand, it was very inspiring. Looking at the students and the young people, it was extremely inspiring. I think if something like this happened 30 years ago, my generation would not be that generous with just putting everything up for our freedom and because we grew up in Soviet Union, and there is much more of fear. There is much more of uncertainty in us.
So you have that historic memory with the students
Exactly.
who are young enough that they don't remember the Soviet
and
Union.
this was for me, it's my personal story, but it was extremely inspiring to look at them, to help them. And I thought that at that moment, I wasn't their educator, or they were educating me. And I was just sharing whatever I could share and my resources and university's resources to help them. And this is why university became such a big hub of social support. And we hosted in our premises, we hosted more than 650 people who, the refugees from the East who found, for a couple of days, found a place of rest with us here and then moved forward to their houses or abroad. The university became a hub of help and support for managing millions and millions of dollars we were able to bring in from all kinds of sources from abroad, and then direct towards different projects in Ukraine. I can't even count how many ambulances were brought and parked on our parking lot, and then went into Ukraine to work in the zones that are affected much more.
So they kind of house themselves here, waiting
right.
to
This
go
was
out.
they would come into Ukraine. There were several. Again, I remember one, the name Team Rubicon. I don't know if this is not a publicity stunt or something. I don't even know what they do exactly, but it's an American organization of doctors and volunteers who come into the countries who are affected by war, and they create hospitals. And it was amazing to see a mobilization of human spirit and of human dignity that was brought here. And all these Americans, and they would come here for a week or two. They were stationed in our premises, and they created hospitals around the border because a lot of people trying to get out of the country, and they need a lot of medical attention. Then when the things started to settle down a bit after a month and a half, maybe in Western Ukraine, they went into the central Ukraine, closer to people who suffer really. And it was just it's a tragedy of seeing the suffering and the death and destruction and such an uncertain future. On the other side, it's so inspiring to see how much good, how much freedom, how much help, how much love, how much support we receive, and we are able to muster among us. And so it's been a time of inspiration, a time of crisis, but a time
of inspiration. So as the students went out, I'm glad that they were part of that inspiration. What were some of the things that the students would do when they left classes?
Right. Well, first, one of the first things, we are geographically, we are in the Western Ukraine. For your listeners who might not be very familiar with our geography,
maybe about an hour and a half from the border.
From the Polish border,
Yes.
from the Western border,
Yes.
maybe an hour from the border.
Okay.
So we are in the furthest away part of Ukraine from the war.
Yes.
From the zone that is affected directly by military action. So geographically, we are in in the best position, so to say. Luckily, there were only very few over the year. There was maybe 5 or less than 10, definitely, rocket strikes in our city or around our city. So we are in the safest place. So right from the beginning, the city and the Western Ukraine generally became a place where all the people from the east started to go to. I don't know the statistics, but I would suppose that millions probably went through the city, and our city has 800,000 inhabitants.
Okay,
right? And well, I don't know the statistics exactly, but I'm sure that millions went through the city on their way to a safe place. So the first thing that our students mostly do, especially in the first maybe 2 or 3 weeks, they went to our train station, where so many people would come by train. They would get off the train, being able to grab just like a plastic bag of the most important things and leaving behind their lives and everything that they had. And they just needed any kind of help, maybe a glass of tea or just a good word, or if somebody needed medical attention, they would have to be pointed into the right direction. And the first couple of weeks when things were hectic and were not still organized in the city, and the government started to do things, but there was never enough hands on deck. So one of the things they started to do was work with the refugees, you would say, you would call these people who were going through our train station, directing them, helping them, and everything.
And was this student that organized, or did the professors and fathers help them do it, or they just kind of went out?
They just went. I know just people. They would show up at the train station. There were the government, the city started organizing things, but they needed people as volunteers to help them.
Okay.
Right away, several organizations started doing things like collecting human aid, medicine, warm clothing. So one of the entire floor of the Sheptytsky Center where we stopped before, that entire area, the entire floor, because in 2 days was filled up with just all sorts of items, medicine, crutches, water. People would just from the city would drive up knowing that the university has a hub where they collect things. And it took hundreds of people to sort of manage that. There were people who were accepting things, then sorting things, then putting them in boxes, and then looking for places where to send them, and then send them out to the east to the military posts, to hospitals, to places of that do social work in the east. Most of these things were really done by students. They did not need much of coordination and organization on the side. University went into really creating structures and systems for a large-scale project. So we collected funds, and we helped medical establishment all over Ukraine to because they started receiving all these wounded and just people from can you imagine, maybe, I don't know, again, I don't know the numbers exactly, but I would imagine that more than 10 million people were transferred internally in Ukraine.
Sure. And I think the country has maybe 40 million.
For about 42, yeah. So a full quarter of our country. And it's territory-wise, it's the largest country in Europe. It's just a couple of meters, but larger than Germany or France were considered, to be the largest. So we are a large country, and half of that country became a zone of war, or too close to the zone of war to just lead a normal life. For the first couple of months, the West, Lviv, and the university specifically became a place of a continuous explosion of this social action to be a place of help.
Sounds like you've done some wonderful work. Just to paint a picture of those people who were traveling through Lviv, I know men, the vast majority of the men would have to go serve in the military. I just talking to people, it seems to me that many people who were elderly perhaps stayed in their
Right.
homes.
Unfortunately.
And so most of the people who were moving through were younger people, younger families, sometimes
Most of them were middle-aged. That's correct.
middle-aged
Yes.
moms with kids kind of
Exactly.
going through, and they've dispersed.
And they dispersed throughout the Western Europe, well, Europe generally, but also a lot of them did not want to leave Ukraine, so they tried to find places here in Western Ukraine. It's been a challenge for us because over the last year, these territories in the Western Ukraine added hundreds of thousands of population because of all these people moving from the east, which sometimes created sometimes even cultural tensions because
Sure, different
we're
places in the
different,
country.
yeah, the different mentalities a bit, and but still, this is a huge challenge. It's a huge crisis, but it's also an occasion, a moment of that gives hope that we can survive and we can raise up to this challenge because we can. We saw that we can.
Yes, yes.
The first couple of days of this war, now we sort of, see historically that we were able to stand up to this. In the first days, nobody, if you ask me, or maybe somebody much wiser than me could foresee the future, but most of us, I don't think we were thinking, okay, we are gonna give up in a day or two. No,
Sure.
but nobody probably could say with certainty, no, we will stand up and we will win. This was not a reason talking. This was our hearts talking. This is not what we can do. This is what we have to do and we want to do. And then when the days went by and our fighting became successful, we realized that we can do
We can do this.
We can do it. It's like
And as you said, nobody thought that would happen. Putin thought it would fall in a couple of days.
absolutely.
I know.
Absolutely. And even among us, we were sort of talking about this. No, we can do it, but it was not our rationality speaking. This was our heart. It was the power of faith, the power of our conviction that this is something we have to do, or otherwise we will just perish.
And
There's no other way.
from what I've seen, it did mobilize the whole country. As you said, the students, other people just staying where they were, caring for one another. Very exhausting days, I would imagine. And now we've kind of settled into more of a long-term conflict at the moment. And so I'm curious how that long-term conflict is expressed in the lives of your students. Do they seem to talk about it? Do they seem to ignore it? Do they seem to inspired by it? Where are they? Or maybe there's a lot of different answers there.
Well, there's a bit of everything. First of all, what we try to do, and even not recently, but ever since the beginning of the war, maybe there was a couple of weeks, maybe up to a month, when with normal life stopped, a hectic life began, and then right away we try to normalize life back to So our main processes of the university could be, performed, that we can as an educational establishment we have to keep going on with our classes. We keep make sure that that kids get their education and get their diplomas, and because right from the beginning we are really looking into the world beyond the war, and it's the main subject of our discussions and of our classes. And I teach philosophy, and somebody teaches economy, somebody teaches history, and I think in all of our classes, whatever our computer science, all sorts of subjects here, I think when we teach, we sort of think of how these people will be, our students will be rebuilding this country. So this becomes, for now, that is the source of inspiration. This is the source of, the main subject that we concentrate on. Whatever we do, it's, yes, we are a country in a war, but we are trying to normalize our lives as much as we can. So the study processes, all the university processes are going on, with addition of all these additional things that we have to take care of, like our help to those who need it. But again, the main inspiration is our looking beyond what we are living through right now.
And Ukraine's a relatively young country. So a lot of the leadership is younger. They're our age or
As
younger.
institution, of course.
Yeah, and then the beauty, I didn't think about this, but the beauty of it is, you're right, these students, these 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, they're going to be right in the heart of rebuilding
Yes.
and shaping the country.
We are, of course, worried about the loss of many people, lost due to death, lost due to the casualties of the war, loss of a lot of buildings and structures and universities being closed and destroyed. I'm thinking about Kharkiv, the city in the east, and Russians directly destroyed the main building of the university, which was one of the oldest universities of Ukraine. There's a lot of damage being done to everything in Ukraine, but we see and we have this experience that damage doesn't touch our freedom and our will to live and to create a democratic country with freedom at its basis, and there is so much to look forward to, because it's still ahead of us to build that country.
Yes,
we are just at the beginning.
So as you speak, I'm thinking about how you told me about the architecture of the chapel, of the building next door, and there were two movements, a movement of the individual human, but a movement of history and the history of salvation. I'm curious if you could just review that briefly, but then maybe express some of your thoughts about how life in Ukraine and where you are in this history kind of fits in that movement.
So we visited the church, and in the church, we try to implement these two visions of salvation. One is historic salvation that goes from the tomb of Christ into the history, and for how many more thousands of years, hopefully we don't know. But then again, we also have a personal salvation of each particular human being. And maybe a university is proper place to sort of meet these two, to make them encounter and to create. And our church sort of represents the meeting of these two. So our church has this built into the architecture, having three chapels, one representing the tomb of Christ, the second representing the first millennia of the church of Christianity, when the church was united, when main of our liturgical, theological traditions, everything.
And that's more of the Byzantine chapel.
And it's the Byzantine chapel with the classical icons and the mosaics, hopefully, that will be built, decorated in the chapel. And then the main church will represent the church today, the modern church, the church. And actually, the modern people, the contemporary people are going in there. This is our major, bigger, larger space where the university meets for its prayer. But then there's also a personal path of every single human being who enters into a union with God from their birth and baptism. And this is why the baptismal fountain will be built at the entrance into the church. And through life of the modern church, and leading to death, which is unfortunately, but a part of every human life and experience. And maybe also because we are the death is so close to us. I don't know if you've noticed in the Sheptytsky Center, by the entrance there is a whole banner with the pictures of students of the university or alumni of the university who were killed during these operations, and you can see faces of all ages. There is the youngest one is in his I think 21, and there are some older people who were connected to the university somehow, and it's their death, their sacrifice of their lives for our freedom and for our country and for our future is very real. Is very real. One of the main subjects of the sermon of our president last year at the completion of the school year in June, so when the war was there already for 3 or 3.5 months, and he was talking to the students. Bishop Boris said that I hope that you are a generation that will not fear death.
Mm.
You will not fear death. So whatever you will be doing throughout your life, rebuilding this country, you will not fear death. It's going to be implemented into your mentality. You will know that death, even though is the biggest of the evils that we have, but it can be uh, something that inspires others,
Yeah.
like our martyrs.
Yes.
It's take inspiration from that and go into your lives. Um, and so this is why we are not afraid somehow to talk about death and put it the chapel of the tomb of Christ right into the church, and every student is brought there sooner or later and explained that this is because this is what we have to include in our formula of our life and the society we are trying to build. Yes, unfortunately, there are some people that gave their life up for so we can be here, and maybe it'll be a challenge for us. Maybe our time will come to do the same.
Sure.
And we have to be prepared for that. We do not have to fear death and escape from it, and maybe building our culture. With my personal experience of living in the West in the 90s, the first 10 years of the 21st century, death is sort of never spoken about, never
And
is really
it has been hidden more
hidden.
and more.
And
When I was a kid, it wasn't so much, but as the
it became,
decades go, it is hidden more and more.
and it's a negative thing, I think, because it's very human. And I know that it's not for us. It's just so close.
Sure.
Everybody, not almost everybody, among our students here and teachers and people that I know here, everybody has somebody in their family or among their friends who have lost their lives already in this war.
Yeah.
So we are all connected to that. But that death is not just a death to shun away and put to the side, never talk about. No, this is a martyrdom of somebody you have to think about, put their pictures everywhere, and know that we have to build a better country for us and for our kids and children because somebody gave.
And there's a certain responsibility when someone gives that ultimate gift for you. There's a certain responsibility to honor that, not just in thanking them and remembering them, but wanting to live the best life.
The best life, changing today, changing my personal life. That's, I think, Christ's death was like that, so that we can all look up to that cross and strive to become better.
I appreciate that. As we start to come to a close here, I know you're a well-educated man. You know philosophy, you know theology, you lived in different parts of the world, so you understand a lot about the world that we live in. I'm curious, with all of that knowledge, what is one message that you would want to tell people, specifically in the West or maybe in the United States, about life and ministry and faith in Ukraine?
I'm not prepared for.
Okay, that's fine.
St. Augustine, when he's talking about time at that time, when he's trying to explain it, he says, "When nobody's asking me, I know what it is. But when you're asking me, I don't know what it is." And this is that kind of question. When you try to really bring something into a very brief sentence, it becomes a huge challenge.
I can switch the question a little bit if that helps.
No,
Okay.
I think I can. Reason I was talking so long so that I can gather my thoughts together.
Very good.
And come up with an answer. And I don't know if my English is sufficient enough, and because I'm looking for the proper words to say this, so maybe it'll take a bit of explaining. I think that I'm 45. My life hasn't been that long, and I know many people who have lived much longer and have seen much more. And even in that short life, I think that our church, our Christianity, has to really stand by its roots, by its fundamental values, and never give up. In the comfortable society where you are tempted to give up certain of your rights to keep that comfort, and because it becomes just comfortable, you just don't want to get out of that circle. And I think evil uses that to sort of destroy us. And it would have been easy for Ukrainians to take the rhetoric of, oh, let's give up that bit, it's just a couple of kilometers of land. Let's give up this our integration into European, democratic world, not only Europe but into a democratic world. Let's stick with Russia as our choice of geopolitical choice. It would have been easier. It would have been less bloody. It would have been we probably would have gained something from that. But that would have destroyed our dignity and who we are. And this is why the revolution of 2014 is called the revolution of dignity. We didn't gain
And just to
anything.
remind our listeners, that's when the Ukrainians stood up against your own government.
Right. But we stood up against the government that was trying to change who we are. And this is why it's called revolution of dignity, that we sort of prove to ourselves and to the world, I hope, that the dignity, which is actually dignity, it's just our understanding, proper understanding of who we are, and then sticking to this, and then being ready to defend this against any kind of attack that comes from outside. So, in my 20-some years of priestly service, I see, as a Christian, I see that probably Christianity is not going to be the main religion for much longer. And many other things will change, but we have to maintain our identity, stick to it, be ready to be maybe martyrs if that challenge should arise, because this is what really gives strength to the future. And we see it from the past, because we realize here at UKU, at the Ukrainian Catholic University, that we are here because of the readiness of our bishops and priests from the mid 20th century to be who they were, and sticking to it and preserving it for the future, even at the price of their lives. So I think that is what we are learning here as a society, to never. And this is a word I'm looking for, but I can find a good one. Never exchanging, never bargaining. How do you say that?
Never
so trading who you are, your identity, for any kind of comfort and whatever else the world might give you. That is what makes you you. And if you lose that, then nothing can compensate it.
The opposite question to that is, as your country is struggling right now, what would be something that people around the world could do to show love or support or be of some help to the Ukrainian people, or to your specific people here?
We've been asked this question a lot lately, because meeting with all sorts of organizations and people who are willing to help and come, and they ask, what can we do?
Yes.
And well, as a Christian, as a priest, first thing that I'm asking them, pray, because I think we are fighting not a human war, we are fighting a war for good and for God's values and truth, which is God is truth. And so, religious or not, we are fighting for his values, for his world, for his salvation. So I think this is the first thing that I would ask is a prayer, is being united with us in prayer in the first place. As far as help is concerned, financial help or any other kind of help, I'm sure that there are many different things that can be done. We need a lot of money. We need financial help. That's just unfortunate reality, because half of our economy has been destroyed. Most of our medical establishment has been unprepared for this, and unfortunately physically damaged.
And in the middle of this, I want to say inflation is part of what's going on.
The government does everything possible to keep it down, but we get a lot of financial support from the world, but a lot of it goes to actually covering all this inflation, so that the financial situation can be kept under control. All sorts of the list would be too long to make it.
Okay.
And I'm sure you can look it up anywhere and find all sorts of organizations that gather support. But what I think is very crucial in all this is that to think that we expect the world to help us build a better country here, to develop this country. Of course, there's a lot of people who went abroad and are living now in America, in Canada, and in Europe, all over the world practically, and they need help sometimes too.
Yes.
So please be welcoming to them, of course. But still, the main what we are dying for and fighting for is to keep this country going and to keep this land for our future, for people who will decide to come back from abroad afterwards, or but it has to be here. So we want to build hospitals here, not to treat our people abroad. We want to recreate our educational system here, not to send them abroad and get great education abroad. I studied in Rome for 12 years, and I'm sincerely thankful to Italians in Italy who gave me this opportunity. But still, here this is, and everything has to be on every level. Any kind of help has to be directed towards rebuilding the country here, and not just creating another how do you call it, a dead body cadaver?
Cadaver.
Cadaver of a country that we all can cry about and how unjust it was. No, let's if we want to win this war, it's not going to be about winning over Russians. That's not the point. I'm sure that we will not go beyond our border. That's not what we want. We want to have our land, our country, and have it prosperous and being
with things that all people want. Good access to healthcare, nice homes that are safe.
I mean, everybody in the world, people want the same things, but they want them on just terms.
Yes.
And this is what we are fighting for. And please help us get that, to rebuild our country to a normality of a country who is just of people who love their land, who love their country, who love their world that we live in, our families, our children, and our future is here, and we want to have it to us, just like every other nation in the world does. And I think this is a basic thing for why deny it to anybody. Please help us rebuild this country here.
Wonderful. Well, Father Yuriy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your insight. And I really do appreciate the time that you spent with me. I know that you're a busy man. You have lots of responsibility here. Thank you for the tour. And
if anybody wants to come to Ukraine, welcome.
Welcome. Very good.
Come and see for yourself.
Love it. Can we close in prayer?
And you do it.
I will do it this time, yes. Oh, merciful and gracious God, we thank you that you are the one who creates and redeems. We thank you that you are with your people in each and every place, in each and every situation. Thank you especially for Father Yuriy. We thank you for Lviv, for the people who are here. We thank you for the hearts of those who struggle from war all over the world. We pray particularly for those who struggle in this conflict. Lord, we ask for wisdom, we ask for strength, we ask that you would provide a way to create peace and wholeness, that your kingdom might be experienced here on earth in good times and in challenging times. And so we give you glory, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.